So let me move this. Okay. So hi, everyone, and thank you for coming to this session. So this is going to be an introduction on to OpenAlex. And this is going to be a very general introduction. Sorry, I have my slide. Of course, they don't work. Okay, there it is. So this is going to be a very general introduction to OpenAlex, to this tool. And my aim is actually to try to spark a kind of interest in you and see if after this session, maybe you would be curious and you can then go and explore this tool on your own time, because there is a lot of content on OpenAlex on the web. There is a very good YouTube playlist made by the people that create OpenAlex, and there are plenty of information out there. So, and I also, to create this session, I use part of the content as well. So there's a lot of information out there. So I just wanted to introduce you to the tool and see if you can get an interest about it, and then just go and explore it on your own. So first of all, what is OpenAlex? So OpenAlex is an open source citation database that was launched in January 2022 by our research. And our research is a nonprofit organization. So it's an organization that actually has a main aim to make research more accessible and more open to everybody. And they want to increase, the aim as well is to increase reproducibility and integrity of research. So they're creating this tool that help research to be open and accessible to everybody. But what do I mean for citation database? So I actually discovered quite recently that the technical name of a citation database is not actually citation database, but a scientific knowledge graph. And basically why? Because a knowledge graph is something that organizes data from multiple sources. So it's able to capture information about different entities, and then is able to create connections about these entities that then people can actually use to do research or to do discovery research and things like that. So in this case, a scientific knowledge graph is something that gets information about the publication entities and other things like journals, author, and is able to create all the connection among them and present them in a usable way for the user. So if you still it's not clear, so I think if I give you this example, so other citation databases or knowledge graphs that are quite popular are Scopus, Web of Science, and Dimension. So I think you would have heard of them and probably have used them. And other that are maybe a bit less popular are OpenAlex and Crossref. And so the main difference between these two groups, so I put them into different groups because these ones, so the one on the top, so Scopus, Web of Science, and Dimension, are subscription databases. So you have to pay access to actually, you have to pay a subscription to actually access the data and use the data. While OpenAlex and Crossref are free, but they have a bit of a different aim. So for example, the subscription databases, so Scopus, Web of Science, and Dimension, they have this, so they want to be indexed, they want to index research at a world level. So they want to be very comprehensive. While, for example, OpenAlex is always a citation database, but it focuses mostly on European research. And Crossref actually was born with a different for a different reason. So he focuses mostly on creating DOIs for research, and then he collects metadata about research. And then you have OpenAlex that I put here in the middle because it wants to do the same thing that the big subscription databases are doing. So indexing research at a world level, but is open source. So it's free actually to access. Okay. So, but why are these databases important? Because of course, you can use them for discoveries. So probably you have used them already to look for citations or to look for scholarly outputs in a particular topic. So let's say you are starting your research. So you need to find all the literature on a specific topic. So you can use these indexes. You can find, for example, data sets as well. So they're very comprehensive indexes of research. And at a bit of a higher level, they actually they are used as well for decision making from institutions and funders. So, for example, let's say if there is a funders that want to invest some money on research on diabetes, they can use these databases to find out which one are the university that publish the most on diabetes, for example, or that they have the most impact and things like that. So it's quite important. They are quite important. They are very useful to understand the relationship among research, etc. So, but why it's important? Because you might say, okay, there are already these. There are many of these citation databases available. So why OpenAlex? So what's the difference of OpenAlex? And so the difference is that is open source. So and why being open is such a change. So it's such a difference. Well, the first reason is because, of course, it's associated to costs. So you have to think that so these databases, they cost a lot of money. So Scopus, Web of Science, and Dimension. So not all institutions are actually able to pay access to these databases. And in particular, for you, you might not see the difference because, of course, you are affiliated with a university. So you're studying here. So, you know, the university pays the subscription for you. So you will be able to use the tool. But, you know, university with fewer resources, or for example, if you're a researcher but you don't work for any kind of institution at the moment, so you won't be able to access this data. So they are not really inclusive. And another thing that for me it's an important thing is like when you use data from the subscription databases, so the data is not yours. So by its proprietary data. So once you do your research and then you arrive at the final point that you want to publish your research, so you will not be able to publish the data. So make the data that you use for your research to make them available. Okay. So let's say, for example, you're doing a literature review or a bibliometric review, then now they're quite common, and you're using data from Web of Science. So once you publish your final review, you will not be able to publish as well the underlying data. And this is a bit of a problem now because, as you may know, there are many open access policies in which you don't have to share openly on your article, but you have to share openly also the data and the codes or anything else that that you used to create your final article. Okay, so this I think it's an important thing. And of course, this subscription database are a bit less flexible because, of course, they give you the package ready. And so you have less flexibility on how to use the data, which data actually you can find. So on the opposite side, you have OpenAlex, which is open source. So it's more inclusive because, of course, there are no costs to it. So anybody can actually access the data and use the data. And what for me is important is that you can share the data because the data in OpenAlex are licensed under a CC0 license, which means they are public domain. And this means that you can really take the data, use them, you can share them, you can build upon them. So you can do everything that you want. And so it's a good thing because, of course, increases transparency and integrity of the research because you will be able to share everything openly. And another point that this will maybe, I will show you later as well what APIs are. And this is a good thing. So you don't have access only to the data in OpenAlex, you also have free access to the API, which is not like that with the subscription databases. So usually, even if you pay a subscription, you usually have access to small packages of data, and usually APIs are not included. Okay. So, but how, you might say, how can something like OpenAlex be sustainable? Because the other databases, of course, they get money, so they have money and resources to invest in it and to create good tools. So how can OpenAlex do everything for free? So basically, the creators of OpenAlex, they say that they managed to do it this sustainably because of three main reasons. So the first of all, it was a tool that was cheap to build, and this because So when the creator, the founders of OpenAlex, so decided to create this tool, so they didn't start from scratch. Basically, what happened was that a few years ago there was another citation database available, which is the Microsoft Academic Graphs. So this was a very large database, but Microsoft decided to discontinue it, and they made basically, so instead of erasing the data, or they decided to make the data publicly available. And so the founder of OpenAlex see a good occasion there, and they took this data and they created this OpenAlex, basically this other tool. And to do this, they got a grant. So at the moment they are funded until 2028. But they said that when this grant is going to expire, they have already a plan. So they are actually doing it already. So they have this freemium business model in which they don't sell the data. So the data that you use regarding publication, this will always be free. But they actually they sell services. So they sell premium services. So for example, if you need a faster data download, you can pay a tiny bit more. Or if you need a specific type of support or service, you can pay for this service, but you don't pay the data. So the data will always be free. So, but in comparison, if we compare these databases, so what's the coverage? Because this is another important thing. So as you can see, OpenAlex is here, and it covers, so it indexes many more publications than all the other databases, subscription databases at least. So as you can see, Scopus has about 97 million records, and OpenAlex is now counting about 263 million of records in its database. So it's much more. And here, for example, I put a kind of graphic representation of this. So this is a recent study that has been published that is comparing the publication, so not only publication, but all the records that are on OpenAlex, Scopus, and Web of Science. And so they compare the DOIs, and you can see, so, and these are only publications from 2015 to 2022. But as you can see, the big circle, all this white part here, are the old publications that are only on OpenAlex. So you can see many more than in Web of Science and Scopus. And you may tell me, how is this possible? So for different reasons as well here. So yeah, OpenAlex is more inclusive than the other databases for different reasons. So first of all, okay, it starts from the basis of, as I said before, of the Microsoft Academic Graph, which was already a very large database. And on top of them, OpenAlex keeps ingesting data from other databases. So it gets data from repositories, so for example, Archive or DOIJ, Crossref that we saw before. Other repository, it means also repositories from universities, so it gets data from there. They recently added DataCite, PubMed. So it keeps ingesting data from other sources. And this basically allowed the OpenAlex to grow continuously. But another big difference, I think, is that you may know that when, for example, subscription databases, when they index the content of journals, so they don't basically index content for all the journals, but they have very strict selection criteria. So they review the journals, and then they decide if the journal follows particular guidelines or they tick specific boxes. Then they decide that the content is going to be indexed in their database. So OpenAlex doesn't have such a strict selection process, let's say. So they want to be a bit more inclusive. So they are happy, for example, to index as well journals that don't have an impact factor yet, or they are new journals, for example. So because they want to give visibility also to journals or publishers that have a bit less resources. And another big difference is that subscription databases, in particular Web of Science and Scopus, they don't usually index research that doesn't have an abstract, at least the abstract that is in English. So many of the research are did in different languages. It's not indexed there. Instead, OpenAlex index also research in different languages. So I think it's a good thing. So the coverage is really extensive, but you have to always to be careful because you don't have this first filtering from someone else. So when you do literature search in OpenAlex, you might have to be a bit more careful about the content and judge if you believe that it's a good quality content or if it's not. So it's a bit more like you have to be careful about how to filter the resources that you find. I think that they lack as well is like, so it's OpenAlex is a lot about transparency, and they have a website. So on their website, they have actually this dashboard in which they update basically how many resources are ingested, kind of monthly, I think they do it. So you can actually see in real time how the database is growing. So these, for example, are the works count. You see, it's keep growing, and now it's more than 260 million records. And you can see for authors, sources, and many more citation counts and everything. So, and I like this because it's very transparent. You cannot find this kind of data that easily for the other databases. Okay, but then of course, OpenAlex has limitation because it inherits the bias of all the other sources that is ingesting from, so of the other databases. So for example, as I said before, they started from the Microsoft Academic Graph. So if there were biases in how the sources were indexed there, these biases will be as well in OpenAlex. And the same goes for the other thing. So if there are biases, for example, in PubMed, these biases are then brought into OpenAlex too. One other thing that they say as well that they recognize is a limitation, is that OpenAlex does not cover patents. So if you're doing research on patents, this is not going to be the database that is good for you. And another problem they have at the moment is the stability, because OpenAlex is quite new. So it was launched in 2022, and there's a lot of work in progress. They're making frequent improvements, making frequent updates, and also every time they ingest from different sources, sometimes this new ingestion creates some problems, and then it takes to them sometimes to fix the data. So yeah, so the data is not really stable at the moment. Okay. So what you can find in OpenAlex, so what you can search for. So OpenAlex have different entities, so you can search for papers, like papers, datasets, softwares, then which are grouped under works. Then you can search for another entity's authors, so who are the people who create the work. The venues are all the journals or the repository where these works are published. And then we have institutions that, okay, self-explanatory, and concepts. Okay, so they also classify the publication in different concepts. So you can do research by topic. And this, just to go a bit more in the details. So this I was too lazy actually to copy, so I took a screenshot from one of the webinar of OpenAlex, but you can see all the kind of data that they have of each entity. So they have a good, a healthy amount of data for everything. Okay, but now I was thinking that maybe I can show you how OpenAlex look like. So I'm gonna get out of here. Okay, so if you type in your browsers openalex.org, so you're gonna be redirected on this page. So this is the main page of OpenAlex, and you can start your research from here. So let's say, for example, I want to see the publication of the University of Aberdeen. So you can start typing. Okay, so here it appears. Okay, so once you start with your first selection, then it opens the dashboard of OpenAlex. So here you can find lots of informations. So at the moment, so I type in University of Aberdeen. So here I have the count of all the publications that are affiliated with the University of Aberdeen. And then you can see a split by year, open access, topic, institution, and then you can scroll down so you can see the type, for example. And here you have a list of all the works. So in this case, they are listed by the citation count, but you can change that. So if you go here, for example, you want to see by year. So now you have the most recent publication first. Okay. So, and this dashboard, what I like, so it's very simple, but it's good because it's customizable. So for example, if you want to look, so here, so if you click on the plus, you have all the things you can add. So for example, if you want to see which one are the most prolific authors at the University of Aberdeen, you can go in author, and here you get the list. And then you can extend it as well, and you can see the complete list of Aberdeen authors. Okay, so in this case, I haven't put a year filter, so these are all the publications that are in the database with an author that is at least from the University of Aberdeen. But if you want to add any filters, you can go here, and you can, for example, look at only the publication in the last 4 years, for example. So you add a filter, and everything changes. Okay. And again, you can select a specific work, and you're going to have the information about this work. So the year was created and published, sorry, etc. How many citation, etc., etc. So the status, if it's gold open access. So the open access status, if was published in a gold, for example, this is a gold, so it means that it was published in a gold journal. And then you see how many, so these are the reference basically, so how many, the paper that this article cites, and you can click, sorry, and you can, and here now you have the list of the reference of this paper, okay? But if you go back, okay, and I put, for example, by citation count, I just want to show you that you can also check if you want to see, let's see, this is your article and you want to see who cited you, you have here cited by count. And then if you click here, you can see all the publication that cited your work. Okay, so it's a really, I think it's a really user-friendly dashboard, so it's really easy to use. Okay, then here you have another level. So for example, we are in works, but you can change. If you want to look for authors, you can change here. And now here you have the list of all the authors on OpenAlex. So there are like more than 100 million authors listed here. Okay, and again, also here you can apply different filters, etc. For example, if you want author that are just in education, you can add all the filter you want and play around with it. Okay, so you can search for works, for authors, for sources. So these are journals. So for example, if you want to see all the publication in a specific journal, you can type here the journal name. Okay, and then you have a bit the overview of the journal, so how many publications, which type of journal it is. It gives you an idea of the article processing charges. So I would be a bit mindful about this because they often change, and I don't think the data on OpenAlex will be changed as fast. I think it might change on the publisher website, so always double check this. But it gives you an idea pretty much of the price that is asked to publish in this specific journal. Okay, and here gives you as well the list of all the works published in a specific journal. And again, you can add all the filtering here, or if you are looking for a specific thing, you can go in the dashboard and play around with it. Okay. And then let's say, so let's say I'm interested in all the publication in this journal, but again, only in the 2022. Okay, you have 16,000 results. And then you say you're doing, I don't know, a specific research and you need all this publication. A good thing, if you go here, you can actually export. So I'm not going to do it now because it takes a tiny bit, but you can export all these results in CSV file, so in an Excel file, or a text file, or as well in the node format, okay? So here it tells you, it's gonna, if you do it now, because there are many records, so the mic takes more than 5 minutes. So it takes a bit, but you can export all of this in one go. And I say this is a nice thing, because for example, this is not possible in many subscription databases. So I think the download limit in Web of Science is 1,000. So if you would like, if you had to download this amount of data, you would have to do it like so for so many times. And I think maybe in Scopus the download limit is a bit higher. It's about 20,000 results. But I think the limit of OpenAlex is 100,000. So you can download up to 100,000 work in one go. So it's really convenient. Okay. Then they added recently this feature. So if you, for example, well, I just keep this example of +1 journal. If you want to receive notification about publication that are added in +1, you can actually create an alert. Okay, so to create an alert, you will have to register, but so you need to go here and kind of have register for an account, but it takes 2 seconds to do it, and it's free, of course. Okay, so this is a pretty much, as I say, it's really simple. I think you can go and explore it at your own time, but it's quite easy to use. And now I'm going to show you the other thing of the API. So I just go 1 second back to the presentation. So as I said before, OpenAlex allows you to use API for free. So APIs are application programming interface. It's called it's application programming interface, and basically it's another way to interact with the data. So you wouldn't have this kind of dashboard, but it's like if you interrogate directly the database using a program. And so it's a bit more maybe difficult at the beginning because it requires some coding skills, but it provides much more flexibility. Okay. And the good thing with the API is that, so yeah, they're much more flexible, and you can do, you can integrate APIs as well with other systems. And I will show you a couple of examples. I think it's worth saying that the dashboard that OpenAlex has created is quite recent. So before actually, so when it was launched, you could interact with OpenAlex only through APIs. And now they develop the nice dashboard that I showed you before that is quite easy to be more accessible to everybody. So there are lots of programs that you can use to actually use API. So here's a list. And I might suggest you, for example, OpenAlex R. It's not too bad. There is a lot of information online on how to use it. And I just tell you this because in case, we have R available in our software center, so you can download it on the university laptops. And then here you have all the guidance of how to use this program to then use API in OpenAlex. So, but I show you another thing that maybe it's easier. Oops, there you go. So first of all, I'll show you a bit the documentation. So OpenAlex has loads of documentation regarding the API. So I had a link I added a link in the slides, but here there is the description of how to use them. And basically, what do you do? So the API, you have to create something like this, so an URL. So just use this as an example. Let me do it. I'll just put it here. Okay. And this is what you get when you have APIs. So just give it a second, and there you go. So for example, here I have the list of all the publication, all the works basically that are on OpenAlex at the moment. So all the 263 millions of them. And now you can see, so I will just scroll down to show you. So this is the first publication, right? So if I scroll down, you will see these are all the metadata of just one publication, for example. So there are loads. And I go down, I go down, I go down. So there's loads and loads and loads of information on a single paper. And this kind of information, okay, and here stops. So here's the second publication. So usually this kind of information, they are not all accessible from the dashboard, right? But if you're able to use the APIs, you can actually access all the information that you want. And I can show you, for example, an example here. So let's say that if you are interested in the topics, so how publications are classified according to a topic. So usually, so here are the topics, and for each publication, it's not there is assigned only to one topic. Usually, it is assigned to many topics with different scores, as you can see. So this is score for this topic. This is the score for the other topic. But what you see then on the dashboard, it's only the topic that's with the highest score, right? So you lose some other information. So let's say if you're doing a research and you want to look at how different publications are classified in more than one topic or interdisciplinarity thing or stuff like this. So it would be quite useful for you to use this data, and you can use them through the API. Okay. So if I go back to the dashboard, actually here, if you remove API and you click, it's quite fun because you go back to the dashboard. You can start, for example, a research. So basically what time it is? Okay, I will just show you an example how you can use the APIs integrated with another tool. So let's say you are looking for a specific topic, or maybe let's search for keywords. So you're looking for something, I don't know, lately I like to watch a documentary about killer whales. So I just put killer whale. Okay, so you're in work. So now you're looking at publications that have killer whale or in the title or in abstract. Okay, and here I have my result. Then let's say I want to filter them by year. So let's look what there is in the last 4 years. Okay, and then because the works contains not only publication, but also data sets and all this kind of thing. So I want to look only for articles. Okay, so I have my results here. So the good thing of this dashboard that I did on OpenAlex, and it helped me a lot when I was learning actually to use API, is that if you go up here, you can get the API query. Okay, and here it appears. And then if you just copy and paste it, you get the API call. So you have now all this publication in API format. Okay. And this is a good way to learn actually how to use the API, because if you see, so all the API starts with OpenAlex org. So here is where you're looking for, so your entity. So in this case, it works. Here I show you the page, because like for how, I don't know how the computer works, basically, sorry for my language. It can show you just a certain amount of lines per page. So if you put here, but you can change the page. So if you put here page 2, you just scroll to the second page of publication. Okay. And here, if you look here, you can you learn how to use the filter by using the API. So after you select this, you have the filter, you can add exactly the filter that I add in the dashboard, right? So it's a very good way to learn how to use the API, because you don't have to be able to actually put this together alone, but you can select your your filters here, and then you can see everything in the API call, right? And now I can show you how you can use, for example, an API call in a different tool. So I'm going to show you, I don't know if you ever heard about this tool. It's called Boss Viewer, and it's a tool that creates networks between publications. And it's quite useful if you want to understand how publications are connected to each other. So I can show you very briefly how it works. So you have here your search that you've done. So if you open Boss Viewer, it looks like this. So you have a blank slate. If you go in Create, you have an option. So you want to create a network based on bibliometric data. And this program can be connected, can use directly APIs. So it supports APIs, for example, of OpenAlex, Crossref, Europub, PubMed Central. So the only thing you have to do is go in here and paste the API call that I created before with the filters. There you go, next. So now it's downloading the data directly. So you don't have to do anything. So you just create the connection alone. So here all the list of publication imported. Then, for example, I can do a bibliographic coupling to see how the document basically bibliographic coupling, and when you put together articles that reference a common third article. And this is useful if you want to see, for example, publication with the same topic. Then you can add a couple of selections, then you finish. And it gives you a network of publications. So here, for example, the all this publication in the same color here, basically they cite a third equal publication. So you know that this one pretty much would be around the same topic, and then you have this publication that will be around another topic. And I think this is quite useful if you're starting a research and you're doing your literature review. Something like this, it might help you to understand how these publications are grouped, okay? So very easy. With the API, it becomes super easy because you don't even have to download data and then import into another system. Everything is done automatically. Okay. So there is a lot of documentation on API as well. And actually, there are a couple of, I think I put here, there are a couple of webinars on how to start with API that are from our research. So I will suggest you to have a look at those in case you are interested. Okay. And this is just an example of how we did with using the API. So we were able actually to use this API call to create a dashboard. And why was this useful? Because basically with the API, as I said before, you can download a very large amount of data. So you don't have the limits like before. For example, if you would download data in a Excel spreadsheet. So it's very useful. And in this case, basically what we were able to do, it just, so through Power BI, we were able to automate these APIs requests. So we were able to create a dashboard that updates automatically. So, and not only that, we were able to customize the dashboard in the way that we wanted. So for example, with subscription database, it's a bit difficult sometimes to have the list of journals in which we published and then to have them divided according to the publisher. But we were able to do that using the API because we were able to extract exactly the data we needed. And as I say, it updates automatically, which is very good because it's a lot of work less. Because, for example, if I wouldn't be able to use the API in this case, what I would have to do would be to download spreadsheets and then import the spreadsheets in the dashboard and then update the dashboard manually. Okay. So, and this just show we were able to use and download a very healthy variety of data and combine them in a way that is useful to us. So for our case. Okay. So I think I'm running a bit out of time. So just the last thing I want to say is that in case you start using OpenAlex and you realize that there are some mistakes in your profile, so if you look for yourself and you see like, oh, this is not my publication, or this is not my name, so there is now a way to request to correct your profile, and it's very easy as well. So they made everything very easy. There is an online form. You can just complete this form, and of course, the people from OpenAlex will review your request, and then this information will be adjusted. And one thing that I think is important is that any kind of positive change that you made in your request, so anything that you do your request to fix. So I think it's good because for OpenAlex, then it's an open source, so all these kind of changes will be used by the community. So every change you made would benefit the community. Instead, I spend so many time in fixing profiles in other subscription databases like Scopus and Web of Science. But then, these kind of changes. So I made myself, I did all this work, and I kind of improved a bit the database they had. But then it's not actually accessible by the whole community because it's accessible only by people that pay. So I think it's good, this thing. So every positive change you made to the database is actually reflected on the community. Okay, and I think I conclude with this thing. So that I repeat in every presentation I made. But in case you are publishing and you see that your records are not correct online, and you see that every time you look, for example, for your profile in Google Scholar or Scopus or OpenAlex, and you see that your publication are not assigned to you correctly, so please think of adopting an ORCID ID. So an ORCID ID is a unique persistent identifier that allows for clear distinction among researchers. So when you actually register for an ORCID ID, they give you a number, and this number is going to be yours for all your career. And if you use this number once you submit your publication to a journal, so there's not going to be any more problem of misattribution of your publication. Okay, so sorry I repeat this in every presentation, but I think ORCID adoption is really important. Okay, so and with this I finish. I hope it wasn't too much. So I'm gonna stop sharing and stop the recording.